Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us here in person and on our live stream. I'm Allie Day, and I'm the Associate Professor and Interim Chair of the Disability Studies Program in the College of Arts and Letters. And I'm also the Diversity Inclusion Officer for the College of Arts and Letters. And we are co-hosting this event tonight with Eric Butekoffer. Did I say that? Please say I saw that. Okay, come on over, Eric.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Eric Butekoffer, and I have the privilege to be the Director of Military and Veteran Affairs here at the University of Toledo. I'd like to thank all of you who have come out today or who are with us virtually for being here with us for this important discussion. Tonight, our topic is a 20-year war in Afghanistan. What happens now? Our focus with this discussion is to answer the question of what happens now? Where do we as a nation go from here? How can we use this experience to guide our future actions with whether you are a military member, veteran, or civilian? There's an old adage that hindsight is 20/20. I bring this up because some of you with us today may be wanting to hear the panel's thoughts on the end of the Afghanistan war and the military's pullout in this past August. While there are a lot of strong opinions on this topic, we believe that we are too close to that event to have an intelligent conversation that is adequate and accurate regarding the end of the war. Instead, we'll be focusing on what happens now. I served active duty Army and military intelligence and was medically discharged in July of 2001, just before 9/11. For many of us here, September 11th, 2001 is a date in history which nearly everyone alive in the United States can tell you exactly where they were and what they were doing when they first found out about the terrorist attacks on that fateful day. I remember receiving a call from the Army telling me to prepare to return to my former unit, the 66th MI Company out of Fort Carson, Colorado. The following day, on September 12th, I still had not heard if I was being recalled or not. So I went to the local armed forces recruiting station to see if they had heard anything regarding qualifying veterans being recalled back to service. I remember seeing a line out the door that had to have at least 300 plus people wanting to join the military, knowing that most likely we as a nation would be going to war. Ultimately, due to the nature of my military injury, I was not recalled to active duty service. My former unit had been deployed a few days prior to Egypt to assist in training the Egyptian Army in intelligence gathering. My former unit being the only mechanized unit that performed my military job and already on deployment kept me from returning to active duty service. I mention this today because most of our student population here at the university were born after 9/11. They are citizens in a nation that has been at war their entire lives. There is not one student on this campus that has not had the wars in Iraq or Afghanistan touch their lives in one form or another. For their sake and for our own, conversations like we're about to take place here today are important as we determine where we go from here.
So I'm here with some housekeeping and access information for you all. So the first thing I want to let you know is if you're streaming live, there is closed captioning, so feel free to turn that on. If you're here in person, the bathrooms are straight back outside this door behind the wall with the giant clock on it. Feel free to move any way you want around this room, make yourself comfortable. And then I just want to explain briefly the process for questions tonight. So if you're on the live stream, just type your questions into the message box, and we will have folks in here in this room collecting cards with questions on them. So if you want to grab a note card in the back of the room and write down your question as it comes to you. This helps us make sure that we're not passing around microphones in times of COVID. I also just want to have some brief thank yous and a land acknowledgement statement. The University of Toledo acknowledges that the region of Ohio, where the university is located, is the ancestral homelands of the Seneca, Erie, and Ottawa people, as well as places of trade for Indigenous peoples, including the Anishinaabe, Ojibwa, and Potawatomi, Kilataka, Lenape, Kaskaskia, Kickapoo, Miami, Muncie, Peoria, Piankashaw, Shawnee, Way, and Wyandot. As a steward of public lands, it is our responsibility to understand the history of the land, the peoples who came before us, and their continuing ties to this place. We thank them for their strength and resilience in protecting this land and aspire to uphold our responsibilities according to their example. I also want to thank the many co-sponsors for this event that helps us with the live streaming, the Disability Studies Program, the Political Science Department, the Law and Social Thought Program, the School for Interdisciplinary Studies, as well as the Communications Department for making our live stream possible. And additional thanks to all the people behind the scenes that make this university run, including IT, thank you very much, disability services, secretaries and administration, and custodial staff. And a special thanks to our speakers for coming tonight. And Eric and I will introduce our speakers now. Oh, I think if we're going to go in order, I'm first. Okay. So first, at the end of the table, we have Bill Ayers, who's a professor in the Department of Political Science and Public Administration. Prior to his arrival at the University of Toledo in 2017, he served as a faculty member and administrator at Wright State University, Elizabethtown College, the University of Indianapolis, the University of Mississippi, and St. Mary's College of Maryland. He has written 2 books and published numerous journal articles, book chapters, and other publications on ethnic conflict, mediation and negotiation, and American foreign policy. He received his BA in political science from Williams College and an MA and PhD, also in political science, from The Ohio State University. Go Buckeyes. A fellow Buckeye myself. Next in line, we have Dan McInnes, Associate Professor of Humanities here at UT. Dan received his BFA from Ithaca College's Roy H. Park School of Communications. He has an MFA in photography from Savannah College of Art and Design. He has taught photographic practice and history at Ithaca College, the American University of Dubai, John Jay College of Criminal Justice, the School of Visual Arts, Wittenberg University, and Bowling Green State University, which we won't hold against you. He is currently Associate Professor of the Jessup Scotts Honors College at the University of Toledo, where he teaches courses about visual literacy. He was recently honored as a finalist in the 2021 Passport Out Photo Prize in Rome, Italy, and his work was selected for the 2021 Harper College Small Works exhibition. And in 2016, his work was selected for the Outwin Butch Ever Portrait Competition at the National Portrait Gallery at the Smithsonian.
Next, we have Veronica Mora, who serves as the Volunteer Engagement Representative in the Biomedical Volunteer Workforce Engagement Department at the American Red Cross in the Western Lake Erie region. She holds a Bachelor of Arts in Communications and was recently accepted into the Master of Public Administration program. Veronica is a proud University of Toledo Rocket. Outside the office, Veronica is committed to military veteran advocacy and volunteers her time as the committee chair for the Northwest Ohio Gold Star Families Memorial Monument and the president of the Student Veterans of America University of Toledo chapter. Our next panelist is Shawn Harold, who is a Toledo native and commercial banker. In addition to his primary career in banking, he is a military intelligence officer in the Ohio Army National Guard. Prior to commissioning as an officer, Shawn was enlisted as a cavalry scout. He was deployed to Afghanistan in 2013 and 2014 and currently approaching 10 years of service. Shawn received his bachelor's in finance in 2018 and a master's in business administration in 2020 from the University of Toledo. And our final panelist is Clinton Oliver Longnecker, is a distinguished university professor emeritus from the College of Business and Innovation at the University of Toledo and retired from the university in May 2021. He has been recognized by The Economist as one of the top 15 business professors in the world and as one of the top 30 transformational leaders in America by the John Maxwell Organization. He has been the recipient of over 60 outstanding teaching service and research awards and numerous industry awards and has authored over 200 articles during his career as well as 4 selling leadership and career books. Clinton is a regular program leader and speaker for senior U.S. military and intelligence community leaders and is an avid and active supporter of veterans across the U.S. in their transition from the military to their next career. Do you want to take this next part?
Sure. So we asked all of our panelists here this evening to sort of think about what their relationship to the Afghanistan war has been and how that might shape the ways that we can think about moving forward in the future, both in the United States, perhaps in Afghanistan, perhaps for refugees that come to the United States, perhaps as families or service members. So that was our sort of open-ended prompt, and we're really excited to see where the panelists take it. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Professor Ayers.
Well, thank you very much, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here. We good? All right. Never sure with the technology. It's always good to check. But thank you very much, Allie, for the invitation, and for what is really a very open-ended prompt. We were actually just reminiscing a little bit ago about it. It is true, for those of us who were at some stage in our adult lives on 9/11. We all remember where we were. We all remember what we were doing. I was a young faculty member, and I was driving to work. And the initial news reports were incomplete, and they were just kind of mixed in with the other headlines of the day. And then I got to work, and it looked like things were more serious, and we were scrambling around trying to find information, trying to figure out what was going on. And then I had to walk into a classroom. I was teaching, at the time, I was teaching a world history course. So 35 first semester freshmen in college who had been there for a couple weeks, and here, talk about this. And there was so much we didn't know. And as some information emerged over time, and then more information emerged over time, it was a substantial shift. So my first interaction, and to what became the war in Afghanistan fairly quickly, was as an educator, as well as a scholar. My own work, I have tended to do work in two different areas that don't always overlap, but in this case they do. One is U.S. foreign policy, and the other is the politics of ethnic conflict and ethnically divided societies. And obviously those things very much kind of ran into each other in the context of Afghanistan. So, I've spent these 20 years teaching various kinds of classes where this becomes an issue, where we talk about the war and we talk about these dynamics and we talk about the conflict and is the conflict resolvable and how is it resolvable, and now I think my sense is that in U.S. foreign policy this is a very important moment. That we've come to the end of a long effort, and this is kind of a time of trying to figure out where do we go next, and I think in a context where American foreign policy itself is trying to figure out where we go next, and so as a scholar and an educator, it's a very interesting time, but it is also it does remind one of the often quoted Chinese saying, "May you live in interesting times." I think with regard to where are we going as a nation in terms of our foreign policy, I think that is very much the case. With that, I'll turn it over.
I'd also like to thank Ali for allowing me a space. It is a deep privilege to be here tonight, and I'll probably be the person who's doing the most listening, as I am not a veteran myself, nor have I spent time physically in Afghanistan. Ali was kind enough to have a conversation one-on-one last week about my participation in this and kind of talked me down because I wasn't sure if I was meant to be here. But now that I've met the people on this panel, I'm humbled to be among you. My relationship to the Middle East is that I lived there for 3 years straight in Dubai, which is a very different place from Kabul or Afghanistan, just to be clear. Same section of the world, but very different cultures. I moved there shortly before as some of you may recall, the USS Cole was bombed in Aden and in a port of Yemen. I started on my arrival in Dubai going to the Rock Bottom Cafe, which is a very popular place on the weekends for expatriates. So it'd be a couple of Americans, not many, mostly people from the UK, French, Lebanese, and a lot of locals as well. I remembered that weekend very clearly because I went to a friend's villa for a dinner, and she was also American, and she leaned over and she said, "Did you hear what happened in Yemen today?" And I said, "Yeah, that looked unusual and serious. I saw a couple of pictures." And she said, "Yeah, that's odd. Did you get some warnings from the State Department today?" And I said, "Yep, I got those emails too." And she said, "Okay." And then we went out to the Rock Bottom Cafe that night, and no one was there. It was like a ghost town. So that was the point at which I thought I was living in interesting times. And then, of course, a little under a year later, 9/11 happened. So it was a strange time to be an American in the Middle East. I took an interest in the Taliban, specifically in Afghanistan, because we received a lot of warnings from the State Department, the embassy, and the consulate while we were there as Americans, specific emails about, some of them were cautions and some of them were more warnings about, Taliban presence within Dubai and where you might go and where you might not. So that concerned me. And then, of course, once the U.S. got involved in the in the country in a more serious military way. I became much more interested in what was going on the ground. Then I came home in 2003 and began once again teaching the history of photography. And I've had the privilege of sort of living through interesting times through images. That's what I work with my students on. And photojournalism is one of those. So I live my relationship, or however removed, with combat veterans and the citizens of Afghanistan through some very dedicated and brave photographers that are often alongside veterans in these very dangerous places. Ron Haviv is a person who works for Magnum Photos, who's done a lot of work in Afghanistan that I've done some work with. And I'm also, I've shown my students a number of times a documentary called Restrepo, which is about the Korengal Valley, and two photographers and reporters, Tim Hetherington and Sebastian Younger, who were embedded with a platoon there, and that was an exceptionally dangerous place. That documentary brought it home for me about what was going on over there. So what I bring to the table tonight, again, I just want to listen, but also my specialty is the area of how we in a Western culture might interpret, however wrongly or indirectly or abstractly, what's been going on in that part of the world.
Hello, everyone. I'd like to thank Eric. I'm here on behalf of the American Red Cross. I was able to serve in a disaster relief organization or operation with the American Red Cross. I worked directly with Afghan refugees. This was fairly recent. I traveled from September 22nd to September 30th. There were two operations going at the time, one in Wisconsin, one in Texas. I deployed to Texas. We deployed to Fort Bliss. Now, though we flew into Fort Bliss, the primary area of our work was in New Mexico. We were at the White Sands Missile Range. That's where the camp was, and that's where the guests were. We did not call them refugees, we called them guests. I served in the capacity of donations. We had clothing, we had food. The most requested item at the camp was for sure shoes. So many of our guests came with nothing but the clothes on their back, and some didn't have shoes. And to see the faces of the families you had, we called them, there was camp babies. There was, while I was there, I believe 15 babies were born on camp, and all the way up through our elderly were served and treated with kindness. I assisted in the warehouse distribution too. Now my link to the global war on terror is different than my cohorts. My husband, Sergeant Arthur Mora Jr., was killed in action in Iraq. And so the global war on terror was incredibly personal. And from the moment he passed, I've continued his legacy and his service to community. I couldn't pass up this opportunity to be able to work with Afghan refugees, and saw it as a way to continue his legacy and carry his torch. The people I met and the memories I made, and these were long days. They're 12 hours. Most of the days we woke up at 5:30. Like I said, we were traveling from Texas to New Mexico. So we would meet in the hotel lobby about 6:30, traveled about a half hour, 40 minutes, and we were put to work. Whether it was distributing blankets, that was a point, and I didn't think too much about it until I got there. The nights in Texas were cooler, roughly about 40s and 50s, and here is this group of people who are not accustomed to that. And so I would see them in the morning, and they would be bundled up with hats and gloves and blankets. And I just remember thinking, what a shock this must be to them, and how brave they are to do this. I was humbled to be a part of that, and I'm humbled to be up here with these fine people.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Shawn Harold. Thank you, Eric, for inviting me out here. there are 800,000, troops from the United States who served in Afghanistan, and each one's going to have a very different opinion and experience. And I'm fortunate to share mine, knowing that there's thousands who are not here, such as Sergeant Mora, who paid the ultimate sacrifice and would love to voice their experience. So Afghanistan for me started when, and I apologize if I'm dating anybody, but it was, I was in 3rd grade when the Twin Towers came down.
You are dating me.
I know, yeah. The teacher rolled it was back when they had to roll TVs in on the big metal carts. And, as a kid, I didn't really understand what was going on. It was in the years that followed, watching the war in Iraq and Afghanistan unfold on the evening news, where I developed a sense of, I felt a calling to do something, what I could when I was of age. And, when it came time to think about military service in high school, I felt a calling towards a combat-related job. And so I enlisted as a cavalry scout in the U.S. Army. In a conventional war, a scout will help guide larger units through the battlefield. They're the commander's eyes and ears. And, fast forward through basic training and my first duty station, which was in Fort Hood. I know how cold those Texas winters get at night, surprisingly cold, even from a Northwest Ohio native. And it was in the middle of summer, in a dark C-17 cargo plane. We arrived at Bagram Airfield, and as soon as the ramp came down, the lights flooded in, as well as the heat. I had friends that instantly had nosebleeds. It took a little while to adjust to that environment, and we stayed at Bagram for a few weeks, and then we moved on to Nangarhar Province, which housed Forward Operating Base Fenty. Fenty was about a 30-minute helicopter flight to Restrepo, from Restrepo. And when my unit was there, we were charged with doing counter and direct fire missions. This base in eastern Afghanistan was a hot target for mortars and attacks because it housed sensitive assets from the U.S. government that the Taliban did not like us using. And so we were often targets. And my unit was tasked with, when those rockets came in, we would try to go find the guys who did it and protect the base that way. So, I'm fortunate to be up here and share my experience. But from, I guess, taking my background in finance and the military, now that I'm on the military intelligence side, I would say financially, I think we spent about $300 million a day for 20 years on this war. I don't know about you guys. I don't have $300 million, and maybe our government didn't either. But from a military or history perspective, it's important to understand that there's lessons to be learned throughout history that apply to Afghanistan. They're going to apply to our future conflicts as well. And it's important that as young leaders and current leaders, future politicians who are going to be in these roles to make very important decisions with human lives, read and understand history and the lessons that it has taught us to try to avoid them in the future. So with that, I'll pass off to Dr. Longnecker, but thanks for having me here tonight.
Well, thank you, Shawn. And I am a child of the greatest generation. My father was a World War II veteran, the second wave, Omaha Beach, and was a survivor throughout the Second World War from start to finish. He was injured a day after the war was over when a Jeep ran over a landmine and his shoulder was injured, and he had, I think, 8 surgeries to repair it. Back in the day. So when we were kids, we were taught great respect for the military. As a young person, I grew up during the Vietnam War, which was a very divisive, divided country around the issues associated with Vietnam. And I think the important lesson, one of the biggest ones when we look at this is, and we have Bill down here, Dr. Bill is an expert in the State Department and statecraft and that sort of thing. At the end of the day, our soldiers, who are the best in the world, are asked to do things based on the decisions of the policymakers above them and the federal government. So they are simply an extension, in theory, of the political movement that the government wants the country to take, given any particular issue. And you know, the thing I greatly respect about our military is the fact that they salute and they say, yes, ma'am, yes, sir, and they move forward. And they do it in a very sacrificial way. They do it in a very selfless way, and they do it in a very mission-centric way. So my connection to the Afghan War is I've had the privilege of having a whole bunch of students over the years who have served in our military. Shawn would be a great example of one of those fine folks. I could ravel off a bunch of names. But here's the thing. People come back from their war experiences because for every individual there's a different experience. And some folks have had sitting in a classroom with our students could be a person who had a horrific experience in the war, and yet they're choosing to move forward with their life in a very meaningful and powerful way. The other students in that classroom have no conception of what that individual has been through. So I would throw this thought out to our UT students who might be watching this. Hey, get to know the classmates around you, and especially if they are a veteran, because I think there's a lot to be learned from them, and they just might need the support that you might be able to offer them. I'll throw that out. I would say, secondly, I have had the experience for the last decade of working with senior members of the United States military across all the services. I did a count a couple weeks ago. I've had 8,500 senior Army, Air Force, Navy, and Marine officers. I've had the privilege, and I say that not in a boastful way, but just to say in a humbling way, to go and work with folks in their leadership development programming across the country. And it's been such a blessing, such an honor. And in doing so, if you go to one of the war colleges across the country, more often than not, when a person comes back as a senior leader, they frequently negotiate for themselves an opportunity to go back to school for a year and pick up some strategic level thinking, a graduate degree in some area. So I've had contact for the last decade with a whole boatload of Iraqi warfighters and Afghanistan warfighters. And when you listen to these folks and you ask them this simple question, could you share the life lessons that you learned by going to war in the context in which you went to war? And the lessons that they will share with you are remarkable at so many levels. They are instructive at so many levels. And if we think we're having a bad day here and there and we kind of feel sorry for ourselves sometimes, I think it's a good way to hit a reset button on the realities of the world in many cases. So I would just throw this thought out to all of us that if you're around, and the comment was made that all of us have been touched in some way, shape, or form by the Iraq War, and we have contact with Iraqi and Afghanistan war veterans every day. The question is, one, do we know it? Two, do we ask good questions when we find out? And three, are we going to be there to support folks? Because there are remarkable life lessons that can be shared with all of us. And one of the questions, he doesn't know it yet, but I'm going to ask him, hey, Shawn, could you share a couple life lessons that you came back with from your time in Afghanistan? So I'll hold that question till it's appropriate. But I wanted to say the lessons learned from transition. So we have right now a workforce that we have 11 million open positions right now in the United States. And so if you're an Afghanistan veteran and you are out there and you're maybe thinking about what you'd like to do next with your life, I want to recommend a book to you. So this is Military Career Transition, written by a University of Toledo alumnus by the name of Bill Freeman, who served our country for 13 years. He was a military officer in the Army, and he has also been a corporate business leader. He's written a fantastic book with instructional advice about how to relaunch your next career, if you would. And I've spent a lot of time with our Afghan and Iraqi warfighters who have retired from the military and to make that transition. And I would just share this thought with all of you to encourage them. In the military, they frequently are all about this issue of reconnaissance. And is that fair, Shawn? I mean, reconnaissance is a big deal. Know what you're up against, and then take a look at your force that you are working with to see how you match up against the complexities of the battlefield. I would encourage all of us, it's good advice for us as individuals, but especially for veterans, hey, stop and take some time to assess your strengths, your areas that could use some improvement, the competitive advantages that you possess as a professional, and what you might do to match up with the needs of the marketplace right now, because they are so many. And the other piece of this, and this is really important, that our military veterans have all kinds of opportunities to have support services. And Eric and I have had this conversation. They don't always know about them. They don't always take advantage of them. So if you want to offer some counsel to somebody who might be a military veteran who's struggling, I would find a good resource for them. If they're a UT campus person, direct them to Eric right here. He's the guy that will help them in miraculous and amazing ways. There's also the Veterans Administration locally. There's all kinds of resources, though, professionally, medically, and mental health support kind of vehicles out there that we can bring to the party, if you would. So I just want to share this, that I want to encourage everybody that I know, as to follow up and to piggyback on Shawn's comment. It is really important to do some reading about this war. We have, by and large, an uneducated population of people in the U.S., and especially people who are in college today, that know little, if anything, about the origin, as Dan was talking about, some of the root causes of some of these issues along the way. And I would go back and say it's really important to become more educated about these things. Why? Because if we don't understand where we have been, there's a good chance we can go to difficult and challenging places, as Shawn suggested. So we have to know the past to be able to prevent making mistakes in the future, if you would. So I would encourage all of us just to reach out and grab hold of the people around you who are veterans. Do what you can to lift them up and encourage them along the way. I want to say, and Veronica's comment about taking care of our Afghan refugees, guests, I like is a better word. Toledo, Ohio is a refugee city, a sanctuary, not a sanctuary city, but a, help me, what's the term? Not refugee. I got to think about it. There's a. Say it again?
Welcoming city.
It is a welcoming city too, but there is a term. So we have a tendency to have folks from all over the world end up in Toledo, Ohio. I think reaching out and grabbing hold of folks in that community and letting them know that there are sources and resources there for them as well is a really big thing, because Toledo is a welcoming city. And so I'll stop right there. I apologize for taking, I think, 7 minutes instead of 6. So thank you for hearing me out. And it's a privilege to be here with all of you this evening.
All right. We'll open things up for questions, but as we're sort of gathering questions, I have a question for the panelists, including Dan. I want to know your favorite drink at the American Cafe. But other than that, I'm going to out myself about something. I'm very interested in peace and justice, and and finding out ways that we can facilitate peace. And I'm also very interested in disability justice. So I'm wondering if there are ways that all of your background and trainings, so whether that was the training that you had with the American Red Cross to go and do this service work, or the training you had as a photographer, right? Or the training you had as a political scientist, or as someone in service, if any of that training lends you a particular skill that would help us facilitate our work towards peace. And I know that sounds very like utopian, but it's something that like I'm really thinking about as somebody that's interested in disability justice and peace. So if anyone wants to sort of take that question.
I'll take it. To prepare our group to head to Fort Bliss, we were required to partake in cultural classes, the do's and don'ts. You know, there are things you do, there are things you don't. To be respectful of another country, but with them being within our presence, one request was for females in the presence of men and women wearing pants. Just don't wear shorts. This is, it's an act of compassion. This is, and it did take some of our other volunteers, time to adjust. And then there were other instances, some of the training that we took, learning greetings, in Farsi, and to hear. I'm sure it was welcoming for our guests to hear some of these volunteers going that extra step and learning, hello, and for the life of me, of course, I can't think of how to say that. But I believe it was roughly 3 hours of classes and training that I had to take before I could even be accepted into the program. And I think that helped.
So your question, Allie, was how do we make world peace?
Yeah, exactly. Easy peasy.
Yeah, thanks for asking the easy questions.
You have 2 minutes.
I think, I love the example, the story, because I think that at the human level, regardless of what the differences are, and overcoming language barriers, overcoming cultural barriers, that at the level of just being human beings, person to person kinds of work, we're very good at that, actually. I mean, your story of working with the Red Cross is, it's that kind of work on a human level that builds incredible bridges with folks who are coming from a very different kind of background, where you think there's very little in common, and yet I'm sure that you found almost instantly that there's so much that you share. So we're great at doing this at the local level. Where we seem to be really terrible is at the broader institutional level, and broader, looking at the broader patterns. I think that the United States in particular has for all of our lifetimes, and I think going back to World War II, the United States has faced a very particular challenge, which is that it's the most powerful country on the planet. What can we do with that power, and what can we not do with that power? And we're still figuring that out, 3 generations, 4 generations in, to figure out what is within our capacity and what is not. And in some ways, it sort of seems like every generation kind of has to wrestle with this. And if I had a good 2-minute answer, I would have already told that to my foreign policy class, and we could have kind of been done with the semester, but unfortunately I don't.
I would just throw this out that I think as an older person, I have realized that it's easy to really look at the things that are going on in the world sometimes and be very, very discouraged. Is that a fair comment for all generations? So I have learned to focus on the things that I can control in the world that I operate in. And so I think it's really incumbent upon all of us to really, I think, know what we can do to make a difference in our communities. And you've given us such a perfect example. So I would think that there's people coming to the United States, these Afghani new guests to our country. Everybody in this room will have an opportunity to meet one in the next couple years, and to make sure that we're reaching out and taking care of the people around us in very real and constructive ways. I have spent a lot of time in third world countries and developing countries, and my experience with people that are living in abject poverty is they want food, and they want a place to live, and they want some level of peace, and they want to do something that is meaningful for them so that they feel like they're contributing. And so I think my biggest sample size is probably the years I've spent in the country of Haiti in the Caribbean. And so I'd be willing to bet, and Shawn could talk about this, if you went to an Afghani village and looked at the poverty there and the challenge that they face, it would not be dissimilar to the things that are going on in a country like Haiti, or we could go on and put a long list out there. So I think at the end of the day, anything our country can do to lift up the economic and stability of a country around the world is generally viewed as a good thing. But, you know, as Bill so wisely said, policymakers have not figured out that peace factor yet. But I would encourage everybody to control what you can control in your own life. And can I ask my question? I have a question too. So Shawn, what are 2 or 3, as a former professor to this young man, and he's one of the people I would absolutely brag about, what are 2 or 3 life lessons you might share with people listening that you walked away from your time in Afghanistan?
That's a very good question. You know, when I was in Afghanistan, I was lucky to have a regular communication with my family. But really, throughout all my military service, I've always found life the most simple when I'm living out of a bag. And so as a soldier, you know, you're only taking a couple of bags with you overseas. And then when you come back to the United States, we have all these material possessions. We have all these appointments we have to go to. Whereas when you're serving in Afghanistan, you have one job every day. You have a good routine. You're going on mission. You're coming back. You're getting rest. You're going to eat. So I think, you know, just taking a step back, trying to simplify our lives a little bit to a manageable level. That way we can have time to reflect every day and develop a certain inner peace with whatever trials and tribulations we have going on in life. And then also, like you said about, you know, third world countries, you know, a lot of them are very similar, Haiti, Afghanistan. It also doesn't take, you know, a person doesn't have to go there just to gain some perspective. They could go to the worst neighborhood in a big city and then come away with an experience that, you know, I'm pretty lucky to have what I have, whatever it is. And there are a lot of people who just are not, they just didn't get they didn't pull the right card, you know, at birth. And, you know, we shouldn't, you know, talk down on those people. We should help lift them up. Because you know, the world just gets better when we're all helping each other out. But yeah, I could probably get you a couple more points too. It's a topic that I don't think about Afghanistan every single day. But there are times when I'm sitting, especially with other friends who I served with, that's when the thoughts and feelings come out. But it's, you know, Afghanistan's a very unique country, and you know, in America, I would be willing to say that probably 99% of the population, besides the elderly and children, on the evening of September 11th, knew what happened that day. In Afghanistan, you know, there's some people there who didn't know for months that another country was fighting in their land, and so I think oftentimes, you know, people don't really understand that, you know, what we have here in America, whether good, bad, and ugly, is anywhere near what there is in other countries. You know, we're very fortunate here. We have our own problems, but overall, they're relatively decent problems compared to countries like Afghanistan. So it's great that even locally we have these organizations that we can help. We can you know, spend our time, money, whatever it is, to just make our community a better place.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing.
So I'd like to ask the panel a question. And many years ago, I had the opportunity to go to I was in Vietnam, and I had the opportunity to go to the War Museum there. They call it the American War Museum because that's what they refer to it as. And that museum has, I think, 40,000 photos in it. It's a photography museum. And as you walk around, that's all you're really looking at is photography. And I'm interested to know, how can photography, or how can the pictures that have come out of our conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan help move us forward with understanding what was going on at that time and moving forward with how we can help others understand what was going on as well?
Yeah, I feel like this was a question designed for me. In the lead up to this panel, I was revisiting some of the photojournalists' work over the last 20 years, specifically Ron Haviv, Tim Hetherington, and some other folks. And it dawned on me, I'd never thought about this, that we've never had a war that's lasted this long. And we have a history of images from this war that nobody has compiled yet in any reasonable way. I'm sure that will be done in some way, maybe through an archive or museum, or I imagine volumes of a collection of books. But I think I hadn't realized the volume of record that we have, and we're probably only beginning to understand through visuals the scope of what veterans have experienced, of what folks from Afghanistan have experienced. Photographs can be very informative. We rely on them every day for information. I encourage my students to make sure there are words along with the photographs so we have some context. And what I currently worry about more is whether or not students believe photographs, because that's where we are now, is whether or not something posted on social media is even something that happened, or whether it's been fabricated or taken out of context. So take that whole problem, just put that aside for a second. We have a wealth of history, but it's a matter of going back into that history. And another concern I have, and I talk to my students about this on a regular basis, is the concept of friction and slowing down. And as I hear these voices tonight, I'm so happy that we've had a chance to slow down and hear each other's voices and sort of contemplate our experiences. I don't think that's happening as much. I think we're being fed a lot of information very quickly that we think we've processed and then it goes away. We now have an opportunity, I think, to look at a lot of the images, the documentaries, and the experiences that have come out of this war, and to have more interviews, to talk to people who have been there. And we may now have a unique opportunity with refugees, with guests coming to this country as well, because we have accepted a certain number of folks to this country in recent months to interview them and understand their experiences as well. That's an amazing question, and it probably should be a course or two.
Special topics.
Yeah.
And I would draw a historical parallel that, and this has been a thought that's floated around in my head a little bit. There have been a lot of comparisons with the winding down of this war, and then folks, looking back to the winding down of the Vietnam War, and remembering the helicopters lifting off the roof of in Saigon, and all of that in the 1970s. But I think that, and this is an odd thing to say in the United States today, where much of our narrative is about how divided we are and how we really can't talk to each other. But I thinking back on that period of time versus where we are now, one of the lessons that we did learn from that was that our veterans coming back from Vietnam were treated horribly. I mean, just put it bluntly. I mean, there's a reason why there's a legal status of protected veteran, because that was a legal response to an absolutely awful situation where, as it was pointed out before, we were very divided about the war, but we ended up taking that out on our veterans. We've learned better. A couple of generations on now, we're not doing that anymore. Yeah, there's a lot of different perspectives about the Afghan War and whether we should or shouldn't have fought it, or how we fought it, or all of these kinds of things. But one thing we have learned is that, the veterans that return, that they are our brothers and sisters. And so we have an opportunity, I think, to have a better dialogue this time around, to look back and to make some meaning out of this shared history. I think maybe we've got a chance to do that a little better than we did the last time around. At least that's my optimistic hope.
Well said. Can I make one more quick comment? I just want to come back to what Clinton said about reading. And as much of an image person as I am, My gosh, with 2,000 channels, so much addictive social media, and everything so available, I am very concerned that we've lost the value of reading a book by someone who has had some experiences, a biography, a memoir of someone who's been to that part of the world. And I hope that we find a way to, again, slow down a little bit, apply some friction, and look a little bit deeper rather than just on the surface.
Well said.
Good.
I know I'm not on this panel, but I had something I wanted to sort of think about from my perspective as somebody who studies disability justice, which is, in the post-World War, starting in 1945 with returning veterans and then with kids surviving polio, we had an uptick of people demanding rights for disabled people. And it was through that coalition historically that we start to see movement towards the disability rights movement and the passing of the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, in 1990, right? And so that's a moment where I really see coalition happening between civilians and military folks, right, to create this kind of broader social change. And I can see that again, I can see the possibility again, thinking about coalitional opportunities between all survivors of war and conflict, whether they are civilian survivors or military survivors, right? Especially in terms of thinking about how we understand trauma, right? And we're getting a lot of really interesting research about the long-term effects of trauma. And so we could use some more policy and legislation that really addresses trauma in some interesting and productive ways. So that was just something that I started to think about, was this moment in the mid-20th century where we saw sort of coalition happening, and where we might see that moving forward, right, among people that have a chance to have conversations with each other, right? And that's where it kind of has to start in some ways. Are there questions from the floor?
I do have one for you, Clint. What are the top 3 traits military members exhibit that will assist them as they transition to civilian life?
Okay, that's a terrific question. I would go back and just say, and it's not real complicated, and Shawn can speak to this, as can almost all veterans. One, they typically are mission-centric, so they become very focused around the mission. And the mission isn't like win the war. The mission is you're going to make a patrol into this area today, and you need to travel. You're going to go about 18 miles. And so calculate how much water you need, how much ammunition you should take, and that sort of thing. Travel light, but travel well. Is that a fair characterization?
It is, yeah.
So that would be number one. I think number two, tenacity. To do what military people do takes a certain level of stick-to-itness. And a lot of things in the military are exceptionally challenging for folks. And if you talk to any veteran, she or he can share them with you. So I think that stick-to-itness is there. I think finally the ability to adapt to changing situations. Those are things that are trained into the culture of most military and the DNA of most military folks. And those are competitive advantages in the modern workplace, without question, especially these days. Good question, thank you.
Yeah, and that's also, not just for veterans, but for anybody. I think, people have a tendency to take the path of least resistance. They could, if they're given a paycheck, food every day, and shelter, which is like a young Army soldier like myself had, it's easy not to sometimes be a self-starter and relax. You feel like you've earned it, especially if you've gone to war, and that's fine. But also transitioning veterans, I would say that, the ability to, whether it's as simple as making checklists and accomplishing your, whatever you write down, but just not, you have to be proactive. I think any young leader today has arguably more opportunity in the workforce than there's ever been. I think there's a leadership deficit in the country, and, military veterans have a great experience under their belt to offer the world. So, let's not be shy about it. Let's get to work and contribute. So,
well said. Can I throw in back, just if I may add something too? The thing that I really appreciate, and I think Bill really kind of nailed it when he made the comment that, hopefully we're going to learn from this and get better, And I've studied organizational change and transformation, small and large and medium, for the last 35 years. And one of the things that I absolutely love about our country, and I think I've been in 37 different countries in my travels over the years, is the fact that America, we don't always get things right. And sometimes we are adolescents. We haven't necessarily grown into what we have, as Bill was suggesting. But I would go back, but we do learn. And we are self-correcting. And the American DNA is find a way to get it done. And the American DNA is we are the most generous country in the world. My wife Cindy and I adopted a child from the Philippines, and when we did some homework on adoptions, we found that America basically adopts more people than any two countries in the world combined. So we are very generous and with our policies to help other countries in so many different ways. And the American people, we donate more money to charities than any other country. We have more laws to protect the rights of people than any other country. And I challenge anybody to find another example in military history where we took the folks who had been left, who are basically inhabitants of the country that we are leaving, and we took 120,000 people out of that country, and we're helping them establish a new life here. Now, might they experience some challenges? Absolutely. Are there people in our country that might be prejudiced toward them? There's still remnants out there, absolutely. But at the end of the day, find another country in the world that is as generous and as caring, and we're a learning place. We try to learn from our mistakes, and sometimes not as fast as we would like it to be. But at the end of the day, I really appreciate the fact that our culture is one that really is about helping lift up people on average in powerful and meaningful ways. So I just wanted to toss that back to your comment.
And also your comment. I mean, I don't have with the knock on, but we're all one simple accident away to becoming a recipient of the benefits that we've created over the years. So, I think it's important to keep that in mind too, that we should help those people whether we're able-bodied or not. Yeah.
I was just thinking, when you said tenacity, I was thinking the 15 women who traveled across the world with just the clothes on their back having babies. When you were thinking about tenacity, the 15 women who traveled across the world with just the clothes on their back and gave birth in a camp in a country that they don't know, says to me, those are people that have tenacity, right? Those are people that I want to learn from, right? To find out what skills can we learn from and with the folks that are coming here, the civilian folks that are coming here as survivors. And I'm wondering if you had, can you just tell us about the 15 babies? What was that like for, were people surprised that there were that many births? Were there, what was sort of happening around that?
Well, so it actually, by the time I left September 30th, had grown to 25. So 25 women had delivered babies. And I mean, and some of them had, small children in addition to the newborns. I mean, these are, hands down, some of the strongest women. I mean, they left the country, some in August, some in September, and I mean they're 8-9 months pregnant, and they're taking this long flight to get here. And I wasn't able to speak to any of the women after they have the children. They're I want to say they're quarantined just to make sure that everyone is safe and healthy. But I was able to talk to a translator who spoke to some of these women, and they said they would do it all over again, and for a better life for future generations. And that's how they saw it.
When was this? Can I ask? What's your time frame here?
Oh, September 22nd of this year to September 30th.
This is very recent.
Very recent.
Oh, okay.
And I'm just curious if you mentioned shoes was one of the big things that they needed. Are there other things that we can tell folks who are on the live stream, if the Red Cross needs things, they need money, probably financial donations, but are there other ways that folks can contribute to this effort without volunteering a week of their time like you had?
Yeah. From our experiences, so there was a few different avenues that they received assistance. The the majority were the shoes. I mean, that was where they wanted every day. And the shoe store, we called them shoe stores and the baby store, trying to, just familiarize it. And we wouldn't tell them, that these are donations. It was like, this is the clothing store. And I think that helped. But in regards to what you said, shoes, I can't stress closed-toed shoes. I believe there were shipments of Crocs. And although they're fashionable here at UT, our guests did not want them. And of course, they came in like neon green and neon orange. And these bins were, stacked like mountains, and you couldn't get them to take them. They were, no, I'm okay. And so that was one need I saw. So shoe drives, that would be a big one. Baby supplies, I will never forget, and this will stay with me all my life, having to tell a mother that we've run out of diapers and they can't leave. There's no store that they are able to go to. So if there's no diapers for their child, there's just no diapers. And so that was heart-wrenching. So I would say diapers, wipes, all baby needs, pacifiers. The toddlers really loved crayons. That was such a joy for them. We would give them a few sheets of notebook paper, and we just started buying crayons at one of the local stores and just giving them 2 or 3, and they lit up like Christmas lights. Clothing for the older children. There's always going to be donations for the younger children, the babies, the toddlers, even middle school, but you get to junior high and high school age, and there's not much out there. So clothing would be a big one. The logistics side is how to get it to them. There are organizations that have stayed. Some of the organizations that started with the Red Cross, you had Wounded Warrior Project, Travis Manion Foundation, Team Rubicon. I believe Team Rubicon is still down there at Fort Bliss, and I want to say Fort McCoy in Wisconsin too. But I know that the SAF, the Service to Armed Forces branch of El Paso, Fort Bliss, they were kind enough to say, hey, if anyone wants to donate, we'll figure out how to get it to our camp.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Veronica, are there other missions within the Red Cross that work directly with refugees other than the relocation services that have already been mentioned?
Yes. The Service to Armed Forces, there is the international branch of the Red Cross, and they work. You had Fort McCoy in Wisconsin, and then you had Fort Bliss in Texas. And I believe, now Red Cross operations, our people on the ground may have ended this massive partnership, but Red Cross their presence is still known there and felt there. With the Service to Armed Forces, one of the main components of the camp was communications. Our guests could go to this tent and they had access to phones and tablets and were able to communicate back home. And that was an emotional job to assist in that tent, primarily because you had people finding out in real time if loved ones were killed, if loved ones passed away, finding out, we don't know where this person is, or letting them know we made it, we're safe. So that was an incredible part of my journey in Texas.
This is a general question for the whole panel. Pop culture often is heavily influenced by world events. Do you think there has been a major response to the end of the war?
In terms of a popular culture response? I'm not a pop culture scholar. by any stretch of the imagination. I know people who are. My sense is that we're still grappling with this. That I'm not sure that we've sort of figured out how to respond yet. And so I expect that there will be. Given time, I suspect that folks will use various means and media to try to tell stories to make sense out of this. But my sense is, maybe we are kind of applying a little bit of friction and stepping back a little bit and saying, let's give this a little bit of processing time.
I would go back and say our attention span is so short in our country that for those 14 days during the evacuation, it was front and center on the news. Maybe a little bit on the front end as the country's military situation was degrading and deteriorating. But, there hasn't been much on the news of late because our Americans' attention span is so very, very short. So I think adjustments and thought processes and other things, as Bill suggested, are hopefully at some point in time will catch up with us. But I sure hope that this is something that people take the time to drill down on. So as Shawn said earlier, lessons learned, so that we might as a culture learn more. All right.
Well, first off, I want to thank all of you for being here today. This has been a very informative conversation. And I have one last question, and I'd like each of you to take if you could take 30 seconds to answer it. In my capacity working with military-connected students, one of the things I've noticed is that all of our military members answered a call to serve. And their families also answered the same call. And so as we think about the close of the war in Iraq and Afghanistan, can you give us maybe one way you think that those folks who are out there in the audience or those folks out there that are not here right now, how can they continue to serve, or how can they start to serve us as we move forward from our 20-year experience in war?
That is a challenging question, which I think explains the temporary silence. I would say I think I would encourage everybody to remember that we all have a role to play. That regardless of what kind of service we feel called to, and for those that are called into military service, that's absolutely critical, and we want to continue to make that available. The military has been an extraordinary institution in helping the American culture to move forward, and helping American society to move forward. But I think we all have a role to play in thinking about it. It was mentioned before that the military it follows the dictates of the policy decisions of the day. Those policy decisions are ours, all of us. That's what it means to live in a representative democracy. That we don't just wash our hands and say, well, it's some people off in Washington making these decisions. They're there representing us. And so, we need to remember that our role is to get involved in that and to read, to learn, and to have our voices weigh in. Knowing that those voices collectively are making really important decisions about where our men and women in uniform are going to go and what they're going to try and do. So, not to see that, for those, speaking as somebody who's very much on the civilian side, not to see that as over there. We're all part of it.
I would offer that I've been a lot more reflective since moving to the area about 6 years ago in the local part of this. It's daunting if we look at all the problems in the country, all the problems in the world. I would say get to know your neighbors, and one way to do that is to become some part of your community somehow. It could be a volunteer at a local library. It could be you work for a charity. It could be you work for a neighborhood association. It's the only way you're really going to get to know your neighbors these days, and we are living through some divisive times. I would also say that local journalism has become a lot more important, and a lot of local journalism has been swallowed up by larger companies. So if you happen to have a local newspaper, or you happen to have one of those small town, rags that's still surviving somehow, find a way to support that and to keep connected with those people, because they work hard, and that may be, if you're not on Facebook, that may be one of the only ways to really know what's going on in your community. I think that's really important. I think the local level is very important for us right now.
Though I never served, as a military family member. So me and my husband married in August of 2003. I've been his widow far longer than we were married. And so I saw it, and I see other families who can do this too, and other veterans and civilians continue the legacy of service to community. There's organizations out there, assisting veterans, assisting military families, assisting our refugees. You do your part to make your part of the world better. And that was something my husband used to say, you do your part to make your part better. And it is divisive now. But I think we can all agree that the families and the veterans and even the students here, there's something that can be done, and it should be done. I've taken it from the day I lost him. You can be bitter, or you can be better from your situations. And it's exactly that. You make your choices. And that was a loaded question. But I see community service is the way to go, whether it's your local, whether it's your national, and you can go international. I know, along with my husband, and the many veterans I've met here on campus, and the military families I've met, and the faculty and the staff, there really is a good world out there, and it's just being with the right people, and you're doing the right things. And with Veterans Day tomorrow, I am a bit more emotional, but I do look for the future, and I look for those who lend the helping hand, and that's how change happens.
Yeah, there's nothing that says you have to serve in the military to be patriotic or to do good things in the world. So I'm a big advocate of people just doing their part. Whether they're working a 9 to 5, whether they're a business owner, retired. The military is not a cheap institution to run, so paying taxes is appreciated to fund it. Supporting your local National Guard, your active duty units. One of the biggest factors to peace is having a very, very strong military. That way people don't provoke you. And so, continuing to support veterans benefits. We all know about the hiring problems America faces today. It's the military is not, there's problems there as well, facing similar issues about, recruitment. It's always going to happen. But, supporting veteran benefits, if I didn't have the GI Bill, I would be working, an honorable job and everything. But, because I had the opportunity to get 2 degrees and, and go through college because of generous people who have fought for those benefits before me, I'm able to, fortunately pay a little bit more in taxes and help out in ways that, I really enjoy. So just, there's a lot we can do. Obviously, I wasn't the only one who was affected by my deployment, so was my wife, my family. Supporting them back home is probably almost more important, that support system, to have something worth fighting for. But yeah, it's I could take the question many different ways. But in the essence of time, I would say I would echo everything they've said, and just continue supporting the cause. The best tool we have for peace is a very strong military system, and with that comes great responsibility as a nation.
Well said, Shawn. I would just say to kind of put a capstone on it, if I was offering some advice about the issue of service, it's been said in many times, in many ways, in many points in history, the two most important days, the two biggest days in a person's life are the day they were born and the day they figure out why. And I think that this is really kind of an important thing for all of us to realize, that we might be a banker, or we might be a person that works for a not-for-profit, or we might be a college professor or a librarian or whatever we do. But that could be our purpose at that moment in time, but the purpose is always bigger, because we are called to serve other people. And that service can come in lots of ways, by volunteering. I do a lot of work at the Cherry Street Mission. Shawn's been down there. There's great volunteering for the American Red Cross. There are so many agencies, Toledo Public Schools, after-school reading program. We could go on, but the question is, what are you doing to think bigger than yourself? Because I think at the end of the day, if you find people who are truly satisfied, and our research on people who are high performers, more often than not, they're purposeful, they're intentional, and they think beyond themselves. They're looking at the bigger picture. So I would encourage everybody, with regards to service, to think beyond yourself and to think big, whatever that's going to mean for you. To think big and then bigger, because there's opportunities to change the world and to change your world by your daily actions. So, and I just stop right there and say thanks again. And what a privilege to be there with these folks right here. Let's give them a round of applause. Come on.
Thank you all, and on behalf of the College of Arts and Letters and the Military Service Center here at UT, that's a wrap.
Thanks, everybody. Happy Veterans Day.
Thanks.